Welcome to Durham Cathedral for our election hustings for the City of Durham constituency. This evening is being organised by Durham Cathedral Institute and Durham Churches Together. My name is Philip Plimming and I'm the Dean of Durham and I'll be your host for the event. I want to say a huge thank you to you for coming and turning out and playing your part in our democratic life as a country. Tonight is an opportunity to put our questions to and hear from the people who are standing for election as Member of Parliament for the constituency of the City of Durham. It is therefore very good to welcome on your behalf from the Reform Party Mark Belch, from the Green Party Jonathan Elmer, from the Labour Party Mary Foy, from the Conservative Party Luke Holmes, and from the Lib Dems Mark Wilkes. Perhaps you could join with me in welcoming all our candidates. And I'm noting apologies from Sarah Wellborn for the SDP. We're really delighted to be hosting this event as Durham Cathedral Institute and in partnership with Durham Churches Together. There are hundreds of churches hosting such events up and down the country, and it's a sign of Christians' commitment to support good government and the building up of society, something which, as a cathedral which looks after 3 Magna Cartas, is something we're particularly keen to remember. But it's a public meeting and everybody is welcome to this event. Let me say a little bit about how this evening is going to run. In a moment, I'm going to ask each candidate to speak for up to 3 minutes to introduce themselves and to say something about their policies. And then after that, we're going to be putting our questions to them. I'm delighted to see lots of questions already coming in via the Slido app. You should have received a piece of paper with a QR code or just simply click on Slido and put in the number that's on the piece of paper, and that will take you to the website that means you can type your question in. If you don't have a smartphone, you can do the old-fashioned way, which is to write it on the bit of paper, give it a wave, and any of the people in the red gowns will come and pick it up and bring it to our team here at the front. Now, Slido doesn't just simply give you the chance to ask the questions, but it also gives you the chance to vote up the questions you particularly want to have asked. And so you can vote for them, and so you can see the popular questions that are coming up, and I'll try and get to as many of those as possible. The questions are moderated, and it's possible that your question, if you submit it, won't reach the wider audience. That will either be because it's for an individual candidate, and we can't accept questions for individual candidates, but simply that questions that everybody can answer, or because it's somehow not in order for an evening like this. But we do hope that as many of the questions will be answered as possible. So I'll be putting those questions on a whole range of topics to the candidates, and do keep the questions coming throughout the evening. Most of the answers are going to have a limit of 1 minute, and so that we can get through as many of the questions as possible. As I say, we're not going to be able to ask them all just looking at the questions we have before us now, but I'm confident that by 9 o'clock we'll have got through a good range of topics and heard lots. Just a few housekeeping notices. If we're required to leave the building in an emergency, please leave by the nearest available exit. The fire exits are at the doors at the back. We're not planning a fire drill this evening, so any alarm will be for real. And I'm going to ask us to keep our applause until the end of the evening, if that's okay. This is an X factor, I'm afraid, or indeed any questions. Applause is going to take up time, and I want to get through as many questions as possible, so it would be really helpful if you don't applaud any answer. By all means, nod or shake your head as vigorously as you like if you disagree or agree. And our hashtag for the event is hashtag Durham Cathedral Institute. I think that's all the housekeeping notices. Now on to the evening itself. So let me ask, first of all, Mark Belch from Reform UK to speak for 3 minutes to introduce himself and his party's policies.
Well, thank you for inviting me here today. I stand before you not as a polished politician, but as an ordinary bloke who's profoundly fed up with the current state of affairs. I'm here to be the voice of the silent majority, the everyday people whose opinions are routinely ignored by the establishment. I have dedicated 40 years to the financial sector, hold an MBA from Leeds University Business School, and I work as a financial consultant to financial planning firms. It's not bad, I would say, for somebody who grew up on the council estate on a low-income family and left comprehensive school at 16. I also volunteer for the Salvation Army, helping people who have been rescued from criminal exploitation. In Britain today, there are 130,000 victims of slavery, mainly from Africa, Asia and Eastern Europe. It's just another tragedy of the immigration chaos that Labour started and the Conservatives have worsened. My first encounter with immigration was 25 years ago when I met a refugee fleeing Serbian aggression in Kosovo. She had witnessed the horrors of war while working as a translator for the United Nations, and she found refuge in the UK. She became my wife. We've been married for 24 years and we have a son. But the situation in Britain is now vastly different to what it was 25 years ago. Net migration is 4.5 times what it was then. The national debt is nearly 4.5 times the size of our economy. Our children's future looks far less secure than ours was. So what can the future hold for our children? With the gutless press release politicians of today. These politicians who have stabbed you in the back by not implementing Brexit, who will deviously work to take us back in. The politicians who will allow your children to change gender behind your backs and then make it illegal for you to interfere. The politicians who will tell you that the end of the world is nigh, while they force up the cost of food, fuel, electricity and gas to achieve net zero on us and the developing world. These politicians who have no viable plan to control our borders, giving away benefits, free housing, NHS appointments and school places at your expense. Ordinary people are waking up to the terrible situation that our country is in, where nothing seems to work anymore. And their only solution is that you need to pay to fix the problems. Well, I'm tired of weak politicians making cowardly decisions that have destroyed our culture, our values and our economy and our quality of life. It's time for strong men and women to come forward with the courage to say enough is enough. You've got one shot, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity next week to back reform, save Britain from this corrupt establishment. Take it.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to invite Jonathan Elmer to give us his words from the Green Party. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. I think you're going to hear a lot from the panellists today about their plans for change, but what I think you won't hear is how they're going to afford those plans. Because when a government proposes spending on a service, it can only afford that by cutting spending elsewhere or increasing taxation. I'm going to say something controversial now. We don't have a cost of living crisis in this country. We have an equality crisis. There's plenty of money in this country. It's just not taxed. It's locked away from the people who need it the most. We're one of the wealthiest countries in the world. The Greens plan a wholesale reform of the taxation system to create a situation akin to the sort of the countries in Europe like Denmark, Austria, Sweden, and Belgium. We'll focus our taxation on those with the broadest shoulders, people that earn or own 10 million or more through a wealth tax, but we'll also reform capital gains tax to make it the same as income tax. We'll reform council tax, introduce a carbon tax and a windfall tax to reduce, and all of this will reduce the burden of taxation on earning people and put that burden more on the people with wealth, invested or otherwise. So this will enable spending from our party to reverse the nature emergency and instead restore nature, to transition to net zero carbon whilst stimulating growth in the renewable energy sector, to transform transport through renationalisation, to build 150,000 new social houses each year, to lift our underfunded crime and justice system off its knees, to transition to a restorative farming that reduces our dependency on imported food, to lift the NHS off its knees so people no longer die in corridors, to combine social care with the NHS and restoring pay to the profession and dignity to carers, to reform the benefits system, moving towards universal basic income, to repeal laws that have removed workers' rights, to restore student grants, introduce a proportionate system of voting, restore rights of UK citizens to work and travel across Europe, to create safe and legal routes for refugees to claim asylum and allow them to work, to sign the UN Treaty on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. There's no more time to watch the pendulum swing between Tory and Labour. Our very futures are at stake here. So, for real hope, real change, please think about voting Green this time around.
Jonathan, thank you very much indeed. It's now time to Mary Foy from the Labour Party. Mary.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm Mary Foy, your Labour candidate for the City of Durham, and how special it is to be in Durham Cathedral tonight. And it's been the honour of my life to represent this constituency in Parliament for the last 4.5 years. And I'm standing for re-election because I love this constituency. And since I was first elected, I fought constantly for our city, our villages and our values. Values of compassion, of fairness and solidarity. And I haven't stopped speaking out for you. And I've helped over 13,000 people and spoken in Parliament hundreds of times. And I've done my best to represent folk in every inch of this constituency. And I'm grateful to stand here tonight and say that I'm cancer-free following a breast cancer diagnosis early this year, and that's down to our NHS. And I'm sure everyone here has been touched by the NHS at some point. Our NHS was the best performing healthcare system in the world under Labour, but 14 years of Tory mismanagement has run it into the ground. And I want to be your representative who champions the NHS and be part of a new government which restores it to its former glory. And this isn't a new interest for me. Before becoming an MP, I was on the Cabinet at Gateshead Council. And 2 causes that I've championed were improving public services and reducing health inequalities. And as your MP, I continued that work. In Labour's manifesto, you'll see policies on improving dentistry, tackling smoking, and making our NHS about prevention rather than cure. Policies that I've advocated, policies that I've pushed for. And if Labour forms the next government next week, then policies that will become a reality. And there's so much work that I could talk about, but I've only got a few minutes, so I'm going to choose one topic, St Leonard's, the rack crisis that shook our community to its core. No one expected St Leonard's to remain closed just days before the autumn term began last year. I've dragged ministers to Durham, I've grilled the government and Parliament, and I've stood shoulder to shoulder with those affected. And I won't give up the fight because the St Leonard's community deserves the best. And I've also never been afraid to stand up for what's right. Last year, I resigned my position on the front bench to vote for a ceasefire. And I knew in my heart that that was the right thing to do, and I knew many of you felt the same. And because of my position and the position of my colleagues, our policy changed for the better. But 14 years of conservatism, propped up by the Liberals, has left our region worse off. A rise in food banks, lower life expectancy, and a region where 1/3 of all babies, children and young people live in poverty. On Thursday, you can change this, and change will only happen if you vote for it.
Thank you very much indeed, Mary. Luke Holmes from the Conservative Party. Luke. Ladies and gentlemen, we won't have applause if that's okay for any of the candidates in order to be equal so that we can maintain as many questions as possible. Luke.
Thank you very much. And firstly, I want to say good evening to everybody and thank you all very much for coming here tonight, because this is going to be an incredibly important election here for all of us in Durham. I'm sure you've seen the polls. I'm sure you've seen the news and all the articles. We're heading for a Labour government. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. We need to accept that. Your choice here in Durham next Thursday is whether you want somebody to stand up for us, to hold the government to account, or you want another yes man, as it were, on the back bench. Well, having been born, raised, educated, worked and served as a local councillor here in Durham, I've learned how to get things done. As a former business development director for a county Durham-based company, I know the struggles our businesses are facing at the moment. And in 2021, when I stood to be a councillor, my main aim was to improve a local school from inadequate to good, and we achieved that in just 2 years. My plan for Durham is simple. We want safer streets, more jobs, a stronger local economy, better education, improved transport, and an enhanced local healthcare system. So your choice next Thursday is between a strong local candidate with a local plan or someone who's just going to blend in and back the government, whatever happens. And if next year we lose Durham County Council to Labour again, you'll have a Labour Council, a Labour government, a Labour Police and Crime Commissioner, and potentially also a Labour MP. Where's the accountability? Where's the opposition? And earlier today, the opposition's, the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury was recorded saying that Labour will spend hundreds of billions of pounds outside their manifesto. So if next Thursday you hand Labour a blank cheque and give them an unaccountable majority, trust me, our economic situation will be shocking. Inflation is down, we promised to halve it, and we halved it again. Mortgage rates are falling. Debt and spending is under control. So let's stick with the plan that's working, and let's not go back to square one with Labour. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Luke, we said no applause, if that's okay. Thank you very much. Let's be fair to one another and to our candidates. From the Lib Dems, Mark Wilkes. Mark.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming. I've lived in Durham for over a quarter of a century, and I've been a councillor here for over 15 years. And in that time, my view has been we need action. And that's what I've been doing, acting to get improvements on housing, bringing social housing, council housing and affordable housing to the areas that I represent. On the environment, as the lead councillor in this county, I've brought forward the net zero targets, secured more funding than ever before to tackle climate change, taken us from average to the best council in the whole region for tackling climate change. And the Liberal Democrats and myself will target to stop the sewage dumping and all that waste that's going into our rivers. And waste is what I've been fighting against Labour in this area for 15 years on the council. And if you look around our county and see the most important issue of all right now is our NHS, which is saddled with a £54 million debt a year because of the past Labour finance deals. We need to fix our NHS, and the Liberal Democrats have a policy to put £8 billion a year in so you can get a GP's appointment, a dental appointment, so a child can actually get a mental health assessment, not in 3 years' time, but in a matter of months. We're going to make sure that carers actually get a decent allowance. And we're going to make sure that care workers get paid a decent salary as well. I've spent, over the last year or so, a lot of time looking after my mum, taking her to chemotherapy appointments, seeing care workers coming into the house on the minimum wage. One of them couldn't afford to fix her car, so was walking miles between appointments. What kind of country are we in where we can't afford to make sure that the most important people in this country get paid the right wage to look after our vulnerable people? We need to change that, and the Liberal Democrats will. And it's fully costed and fully funded. We will reverse the tax cuts that the Conservatives have put on the big banks, and we will make sure that the digital tax, which is 2% on the likes of Twitter and Facebook, goes up to cover these costs. A fully funded manifesto. So my pledge to you is, on housing, I've got a record of action. On the environment, a record of action. On healthcare, I will fight to get our healthcare improved in this county. So please vote Liberal Democrat, vote for Mark Wilkes. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. We've heard from all our candidates now. We're now going to move to questions, and the candidates have kindly agreed to respect, in general terms, a 60-second limit to their answers so that we can, but there'll be a level of generosity, don't worry. Our first question, which actually happens to be the highest question on Slido, do keep the questions coming though, is about social care. What will your party do to adequately fund social care? Mary Foy.
Okay, well, we all know that there is an absolute crisis in social care, and with our ageing population, it's only going to get worse. And one of the issues is that the care workers are not paid enough. And what Labour are going to do through the new deal with working people is enhance partnership working across employers, trade unions and government to put in place fair pay agreements on social care to give care workers the pay that they deserve. There's also an issue about the backlog in hospitals, in care homes, where there are not enough care homes for people to go into, so that they're blocking the beds in the hospitals. That's another issue that needs to be sorted out. But what Labour will do is work towards having a national care service that is on equal par with our National Health Service.
Thank you very much indeed. Mark Belch.
Reforms plans are to commence a royal commission into the social care system. A national plan is needed for a sustainable system with flexibility, tax incentives and VAT breaks, and much less waste. We need to simplify social care through a single funding system instead of splitting it between the NHS and local authorities. And more funding will be needed, that is true. But we'll also stop the offshore tax breaks where care home providers are able to avoid paying tax and send it all offshore. So that'll be our plan.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. Mark Wilkes.
Thank you. So I've already mentioned about our Liberal Democrat plans to put over £8 billion into our health services, and part of that is to make sure that every single care worker in this country is paid at least £2 more than the living wage. I want to see that go up further as well, because if we don't pay people a decent wage, then we're going to struggle to actually find the people to work in social care. We also need to make sure that our councils are properly funded. Between 60 and 70% of all the funding now that all of councils across the country are spending is on adult and children's social care. And this Conservative government has simply not put enough funding in to make sure that the money is there. Less than 25% of all the money the council has is your council tax. We have to make sure that the funding comes from government to local authorities and local health authorities so that we can afford to pay. At the end of the day, you've got to pay for decent public services. The money just doesn't appear from nowhere, and we have a costed plan which will make sure that those who can afford to pays it.
Thank you very much indeed. Jonathan Elmer.
Thank you, Chair. There is indeed a crisis in social care. 400,000 people awaiting care and 4.7 million unpaid care workers. So when I talk about those unpaid care workers, they're people like you and me who are normally looking after somebody in their family who's in need of care. They're entitled to an allowance, but it's not enough. They should be entitled to holidays, but don't get them. So there's a real strain. And the country simply isn't picking up the tab for this enormous service that those care workers are doing. We would propose combining health and social care. We're proposing investing in health and social care by 20 billion per year, which is realistically what's needed here. And the final thing I want to say is just to momentarily talk about children in care. This is a huge issue, especially for Durham County Council, and an area actually where councils spend most of their money, but they simply can't afford it at the moment because of the various Conservative cuts that have taken place over the last 10 years. As a party, we're proposing to uplift council funding by £3 billion a year to try and make arrangements for those children as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. And Luke Holmes.
Thank you very much. Look, it's an important issue to so many people, and I've heard candidates refer to cuts to social care budgets. That is not true. In the last 2 years, we have invested an additional £8.6 billion into social care, and we've committed to continuing to invest and find a solution to a long-term sustainable social care system. The government recently published a social care white paper to reform our social care system, which we would intend to bring through Parliament and enact should we be re-elected. We've also committed to a multi-year funding settlement review for local authorities, and that's at the next spending review. So we have a plan. We've already delivered £8.6 billion in the last years. We have a plan to continue investment. We have a plan to reform social care, and we have a plan to provide sufficient finances to local authorities.
Thank you, all of you. And a follow-up question, this time more generally on the NHS. Is it time that we recognise that the NHS cannot go on in its current form? So broadening out from social care in particular, is it time that we recognise that the NHS cannot go on in its current form? Jonathan Elmer, first of all.
No.
Good. That's the level of brevity we were hoping for. Mary Foy.
Well, of course, it can't go on because it's been run into the ground. But also we need to look a lot more at prevention. And we're looking at those social conditions that people live in, their employment, their health, their homes. All of those issues affect a person's health. And if we can prevent those illnesses, then less people will end up in hospital. So that must go hand in hand with forever funding our National Health Service.
Thank you very much, Dee. Luke Holmes.
Thank you. I want to be very clear. The NHS must remain free at the point of use. Let me make that very clear. I think we do need to reform some elements of the NHS. We need to find a way to get on top of the backlogs. Waiting lists are coming down, but not quickly enough, which is why we've committed to employing an extra 92,000 nurses into the NHS, should we be re-elected in the next Parliament, because we need more staff to get on top of the backlogs to see you more quickly and more urgently when you need to see an NHS doctor.
Thank you very much. Mark Belch.
I find it staggering that half the payroll at the NHS is paid to non-frontline medical staff. I can't walk into a hospital without seeing a rainbow flag. I see diversity officers earning £100,000 a year when a nurse earns significantly less. So yes, I think there needs to be radical reform of the NHS. I think we need to look where the money is being spent, get the money down to the patient, because it goes in at the top and then it swims around and everyone lines their pockets and they achieve their ideologies. But what they should be doing is spending the money on getting people better and getting that waiting list down, which is nearly 8 million people.
Thank you. And Mark Wilkes.
No, but what I will do tomorrow is go and get a diversity flag so that our hospital can have another one, because I believe in a tolerant society.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're not... Thank you. Let's Mark speak. Mark.
What is clear is that there are problems within the NHS, and it is down to the fact that we have an ageing population, and we need to put more funding in. The Liberal Democrats are committed to that. We also have tens of millions of pounds being handed over to a private company in County Durham, which should be being invested into making sure people can get an operation when they need. I want to see that PFI contract scrapped or reformed so that those tens of millions of pounds can go into the frontline healthcare service in this county. So no, I don't agree that the NHS can't carry on as it is, but what I will say is if you elect me, I will be fighting for our NHS every step of the way.
Thank you very much, all, for those answers to the questions. We're going to move up onto the topic of housing. In Durham, we have long waiting lists for affordable housing and high levels of homelessness. How would you and your party tackle this and help people to have a home? Luke Holmes.
Well, firstly, I'm 21. I'm looking to buy my first home. I know how hard it is to get on the housing ladder. And since we left the EU, one of the benefits is that we've released the opportunity to build 100,000 new homes. And in our manifesto, we pledged to build 1.6 million additional homes under the next Parliament. But in addition to that, in Durham specifically, what we have is a problem where good quality family homes in our city centre are being converted into HMOs for students. And that to me is just unacceptable on two levels, because we need those homes for families who live here, who have grown up here, so they can spend their whole life in their original home. But also, students need purpose-built student accommodation elsewhere. It's not fair on families and it's not fair on students. So as your MP, I would advocate for continued house building and also advocate for a change of the planning framework to give local planning authorities the powers they need to refuse the conversion of family homes to HMOs.
Thank you very much. Mark Wilkes.
14 years of a Conservative government hasn't fixed the HMO problem. in our city. So I don't see how anyone would be able to fix that if they were a member of the Conservative Party, to be honest. Housing. When I became a cabinet member on the council, we had 2 council houses. We've now got 140. And some of those houses are actually helping with homelessness as well. So when somebody's fleeing domestic violence or ends up being thrown out of their house for any reason, we're making sure that we can get people into a home. So 2 to 140 in 3 years, that's the kind of record that I'm proud of. We've started building new council houses. What I want to see is the Liberal Democrat plans implemented, which will allow councils to buy land at its normal value, not the inflated value, so that we can actually crack on with building houses that are affordable social homes in this county. Not all councils have a huge amount of land anymore. Lots had to be sold off or it's been used for building housing. The best way to deal with the housing crisis is the Liberal Democrat plan to build 150,000 new social homes each year. And if we give councils the ability to buy land at the base value, we can crack on with doing that.
Thank you very much indeed. Sorry to cut you off, Mark. Housing, affordable housing, Mark Belch.
We'll stop the boats. In the last 2 years, our population's swollen by 2 million people. Laws of supply and demand obviously mean that those people need to be housed at a cost of £8 million a day, which pushes up rents, which means our young people can't afford to live places. We need to put British people first. We need to bring them to the front of the queue. The fact that we need to build a house every 2 minutes puts us under pressure that we shouldn't be under. But on a more positive note, we do need to accelerate housing on brownfield sites, and that's an area that we will explore.
Thank you very much. Mary Foy.
Well, what can I say after that? Absolute nonsense and racism there. Labour will pledge to build 1.5 million new homes, new affordable and social homes during the next Parliament. There'll be new modern homes fit for purpose, fit for older people going forward so they can live in those homes throughout their life. And we're going to tackle the huge crisis of damp and mould in homes as well, which is leading to a lot of health inequalities, poor health and even death, as we know. And in terms of HMOs, I've worked with the university to block the number of HMOs in the city. It's absolutely horrendous in some parts of our communities where whole streets are taken up by HMOs. And in fact, it's the current Liberal Democrat Council who have got the chance to block those HMOs through their planning legislation. And in terms of homelessness, the Tories pledged to end rough sleeping in their 2019 manifesto, and it's now increased.
And finally, Jonathan Elmer.
Thank you. So 1 million on council house waiting lists across the country. HMOs are a huge issue in the City of Durham. I sit on the Durham Planning Committee, and I've personally been able to persuade the committee to block conversions to HMOs on numerous occasions so that they remain as family housing, which is what we need here. But now there's a pushback against that. I want to also talk about, there's this issue in relation to the number of houses that get built, and people are concerned that it's the planning process that is stopping houses being built. But it really isn't. Across the country, there's something like 1 million approved houses yet to be built. The bulk developers have got approvals, they're just not building them out. They're waiting for the right market conditions before they do that. That's actually the biggest barrier to us bringing new houses on stream. So when people say this is all, what we need is reform of the planning system, that essentially is the bulk house builders lobbying. So that's not really the blockage at all. I think that, if we were elected, we would certainly be putting much more pressure on the bulk house builders not to dominate that market and release some of that housing, actually build it out. Also, 150,000 houses, social houses, we construct per year. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Let's move on to the next question around prisons. We know that in Durham we have 3 prisons. A question is, it's predicted that our prisons could completely run out of room in a matter of days. What would you do to address this problem? Mark Wilkes.
So, at one of the prisons, two of the prisons actually, in my ward as a councillor. The reality is that we've got a broken justice system in this country, where it's taking months, years for people to get through the system. We need to speed that up. We need to look at which offences require you to be locked up, let's be honest. We need to look at how we get proper restorative justice, how we make sure that we don't get to a point where someone finds themselves in a position where they're committing a crime. And for far too long, I feel that politicians have just sought to use our prison service as and offenders as just a means of a way of attacking someone. If we deal with all of the other issues as a society, we will get to the point where we actually start to see our crime rates fall. That's what we need to get to, because sound bites about building an extra 20 prisons or investing an extra however many millions of pounds in doesn't actually stop people from reoffending. What stops people from reoffending is putting in the right things that you need, like mental health support and all of the other issues that come with someone committing a crime. You deal with that, you start to see the numbers come down.
Thank you, Mark. Luke Holmes.
The simple solution is build more prisons. If somebody commits a crime, they need to be taken off our streets so we can keep families safe and secure. We're going to recruit 8,000 more full-time, fully warranted police officers to get criminals off our streets. And we're going to build new prisons. We're going to complete our programme of 20,000 new prison places by 2030, and we're going to make it easier to build new prisons in appropriate places by scrapping legacy EU rules and streamlining our planning system.
Thank you very much indeed. And Jonathan Elmer.
I agree with Mark on this one, actually. Prisons demonstrably serves to increase, going to prison serves to increase rates of reoffending. There's no point people going to prison if when they come out of prison they're going to continue to commit crime, potentially to commit even more crime, because they've learned how to do it whilst in prison. Not everyone goes to prison for life. So the rehabilitative aspect of prison is so important to get right, and it's just not happening at all at the moment. They're terribly overcrowded situations, and we need to reduce the number of people in them. And again, I agree that the point here is that the people that are dangerous to society should be the ones in prison. Not everybody for other sorts of offences that can be equally served in some sort of community sentence. So a move to restorative justice is tremendously important, to force offenders to take responsibility for the consequences of their actions, to understand the impact of their actions. That's what restorative justice is all about. But I'd like to focus also on the need for youth services, drug rehabilitation, mental health care, all of which are other services that are underfunded at the moment and add to crime rate.
Thank you, Mark Belch.
Luke, I absolutely agree with you. We need to build more prisons. This country is a soft touch. People come here because they know that they can commit crime. We actually attract, like a magnet, Europe's worst. I know that for a fact because I spend a lot of time in Albania, and I know exactly the mentality and I know what goes on. We need to build more prisons. Reform will build 10,000 new prison places, 40,000 new police officers, and take these people off our streets. We need to tidy our street up because it's violent out there, and these people are treated like they're just not treated the way they should be. My wife works in a supermarket, and she has people coming in on a daily basis with machetes threatening her and then just walking off with what they want from the shelves. I don't want to live in a country like that. These people need to be taken off our streets, and I've got no sympathy for them.
And Mary Foy.
Bang them up.
Mary Foy.
Thank you. Well, I do agree with some of the issues that have been said about restorative justice and mental health issues, and to look after our prisoners when they come out, to stop them reoffending. But I've visited all our three prisons here in Durham, and I've spoken to the Prison Officers Association and to prisoners, and the capacity isn't the problem, it's staff retention and the lack of prison officers to look after people. Unfortunately, some prison officers now have to work until they're 68. They can't retire until they're 68. So there's one reason why we don't get as many prison officers working in the system. But it needs reform, and it isn't working at all. And I think we must work closer with the government and the prison officers to make sure that the job is more attractive, and we can recruit more prison officers.
Thank you very much indeed. Let's move on to a question that's been voted for by lots of you, which is relating to the environment and the net zero plans by 2050. The question is that 34 people have voted up on the Slido app. Do please keep the questions coming, and particularly keep voting for them. What will your specific plans be to ensure that Durham reaches carbon net zero by 2050? Mark Belch.
Reform's plan is to scrap net zero to save £30 billion every year. The cost of net zero is making us poorer. There are alternatives. My favourite is to take some time to explore new technologies that are either coming on board or will come in the future. We don't need to rush to this and make us all poorer. So, for example, exploring the viability of shale gas. And I say exploring because we need to be very careful with this. But there's possibly £1 to £2 trillion worth of energy under our feet, and we have to look at that. The possibility of using these small-scale nuclear reactors as well, a clean energy. There are our plans.
Thank you. And Jonathan Elmer.
I hope you don't take that scientifically illiterate response to heart. Our planet, and this is the issue of our planet, the climate crisis combined with a nature crisis, the disappearance of nature on this planet. Pollinating insects enable food production. Fertile soil. Soil is an ecosystem. Clean, fresh water that we need to drink. The oxygen in the very air we breathe comes from plants. Carbon dioxide that causes climate change, well, that's removed from the air by plants. Put it simply, without these natural systems, we can't exist. So to deny the reality of that problem seems dangerous and extreme. As you can probably expect, my party is very, very committed to tackling these problems full on. In fact, we wouldn't be targeting 2050, we would be targeting a net neutrality date of at least 10 years sooner than that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mary Foy.
Well, Labour are going to set up Great British Energy, and that will obviously be a publicly owned clean power company. It'll cut bills for good. It'll boost energy security so that we're not reliant on Putin. And it'll be paid for by a windfall tax on the oil and gas giants. We've pledged to double onshore, to triple solar power, to quadruple offshore, and create 650,000 green jobs in the next 10 years. And that will also be funded with investment from private investors. And in fact, Labour will become, if we're in government, the greenest government in history.
Thank you. Mark Wilkes.
So I've got a record of action on this. I spoke about that earlier. The Liberal Democrat plan is 2045, not 2050, because we recognise how important it is. And it's important for quite a few different reasons. It's important that we make sure that we get all of our energy from renewables by 2030, because it will bring down the cost of our energy bills. It's also important that we make sure that all of our houses are properly insulated, and for a number of years now there's been a failure of government to invest in that area. And it's important for our own security as well as a nation. So as I look back and see the last 3 years as the lead councillor, I've seen that we've brought forward our targets as a council to 2030. I was up a few weeks ago looking at our new 3 megawatt solar farm up at Morris and Busty, where we have a lot of our vehicles. It's saving us £750,000 a year. Anyone who says to you that the move to net zero can't be afforded is delusional, and is also deluded that this planet that we can continue as a human race to continue using more than one planet's worth of our resources.
And finally, Luke Holmes.
Thank you. Well, I think we need to take a pragmatic and proportionate approach with net zero. We need to make sure that families are given the time to make changes that affect their lives. We must ensure people are never forced to rip out their existing boiler and replace it with a pump. But we will invest £6 billion in energy efficiency over the next 3 years to help households install energy efficiency measures and solar panels. In my opinion, we need to cut the cost of net zero for consumers by taking a pragmatic approach. We will make sure there are no new green levies or charges, while also accelerating the rollout of renewables.
Thank you. Let's ask a connected question there, which a number of you have voted for, which is about sewage. And I can ask you a 30-second answer here. It's a slightly shorter approach. The question is, what will you and your party do to end the dumping of sewage in our rivers? What will you and your party do to end the dumping of sewage in our rivers? Jonathan Elmer.
Quite simply, the reason that this problem exists is because our water companies operate on a profit basis. Their function is to provide profit for shareholders and not look after the quality of water and provide water. Our party would renationalise the water companies. This problem is particularly pertinent to me at the moment because I've been analysing the river water quality of my local river, the River Brownie, and found that there's extremely high rates of nitrates within it, which is driving away life. It's a serious problem. Thank you.
Mary Foy.
Well, I voted against the dumping of sewage into our waterways, unlike the Conservative Party, and I will continue to push for that. Labour will be very hardline on this, and they will put penalties in place to the water companies if they find that they are tipping sewage. I've written to Northumbrian Water, and they've assured me that they've cracked down a bit on the sewage that goes into the rivers, but I'll be monitoring that very, very closely.
Thank you. Mark Wilkes.
So Liberal Democrats will put a legally binding law on this so that the water companies can't do this, and a £2 billion tax as well. But we need to move the ownership of our water companies across into a different type of ownership where the dividends and the profits are going back into fixing the environmental problems and improving our water supply. I think that needs to sit separate from government in some form of community interest organisation. Complete renationalisation and running by government probably won't work.
Thank you very much. Luke Holmes.
Thank you. Look, the reason we know this is an issue is because the Conservatives are now testing our water. Under the last Labour government, just 7% of our water was tested. That's now 100%. That's why we know it's an issue. And let me be honest, nationalisation of our water is completely unaffordable. It'll simply lead to higher tax bills landing on your doorstep. So what we've done is we've committed to capping executive bonuses for companies who are found to dump sewage in rivers, and we've committed to using income generated from fines to pay to do projects to clean up our waters.
Thank you very much, and thank you for those admirably brief answers. We're going to turn our perspective overseas, if that's okay, and ask a few questions relating to foreign policy. First question, which... Oh, do apologise. I'm so sorry. I picked you off and you didn't give it. Mark Belch, do apologise. Thank you.
Well, reform would bring utilities under much more control of the British taxpayer. So we would launch a new model that would give us much more control to stop these companies from tipping sewage into the rivers or wherever it is. So that would be a model which is 50% owned by the taxpayer and 50% owned by pension companies. So that way, everybody has a share, everybody has a financial stake in the ongoing production of utilities, not just water, but all utilities. But actually, I just want to say on a personal note, it absolutely disgusts me that anybody, whether a nationalised industry or a private industry, any individual person could even think about doing this. It's absolutely disgusting. I'll just lock them up if it were me.
Thank you, and I apologise for missing you out, Mark, but I'm glad you got your say. So let's turn our perspective. We had a number of questions relating to foreign policy. The first question here, which has been voted for by 36 people, is how would candidates like to see our relationship with the European Union developing in the next decade? Mark Wilkes.
Let's be honest, Brexit's been a complete disaster for this country. Food stuck at the borders, young people not able to go and train and work overseas. We need to get back to a point where we have a much closer working relationship with our European partners, because that's what they are. And anyone who goes on about, oh, we've got to leave the EU, we've got to move away from Europe. We're in Europe, and I'm proud of the fact that we're in Europe. And I want to see a time in the future where we get back to having us in a single market where our young people can go and work where they want to in Europe, and young people from Europe can come here to work as well. I want to see a time when we don't have food stuck at the borders. I want to see a time when our relationship with other countries isn't broken, where we're looked at as a pariah, where people who I know who are from overseas say to us, why on earth did you do that? The trouble is, the people who did it, and many of us are probably in this room, I didn't vote for Brexit, but we're older. It's the future for our young people that matters.
Thank you very much indeed. Mark Belch.
Well, the majority of the population voted for Brexit. We should have had independent trade policy, regulatory freedom, sovereignty over our own law, border security, that would be nice, and immigration control. These are the things that Brexit should have delivered. But it was implemented by Remainers, squandered by the government. But going forwards, there's two things I'd like to see. First of all, I'd like to see the French take back the people that keep leaving their land. But secondly, we do need to renegotiate an EU trade and cooperation agreement.
Luke Holmes.
Thank you. Well, the European Union are our friends, they're our partners, they're our allies, and we need to cooperate and continue to cooperate with them on important issues. But, you know, we left the EU off the back of a democratic referendum of the British people, and going back now is just impractical. And in fact, if we were to rejoin, it would be on worse terms than our previous membership. So going back into the EU, or even, you know, rejoining the EU in all but name, getting caught up in their red tape with none of the benefits, which seems to be what Labour wants to do, that is not a solution to this. We need to continue to work with them. They're our partners, our allies, but we can't rejoin the EU.
Thank you. Mary Foy.
Well, I voted Remain, as did the City of Durham, and I would consider myself an internationalist. And what has happened to our country since Brexit has been heartbreaking. The divisive nature of the referendum has caused so many problems with people in our communities. And so in terms of going back into the EU, I don't think at this moment in time it's the best thing to have another referendum for this country, because we know how difficult it was. So what we do, we need to make Brexit work. And first of all, we need to rebuild the relationship we have with the EU. We need to start trading again with the EU, and we need to show we have to build up that trust that's been lost over the absolute farce that the referendum was, and what's been put in place since then. It's been an absolute disaster.
Thank you. And Jonathan Elmer.
I mean, the decision for us to leave Europe ultimately stemmed from a power struggle in the Conservative Party. Let's face it, severance of our connections with Europe can now be seen to have brought none of the promised benefits. We've reduced UK exports, we've pushed up non-EU migration enormously, we've blocked UK residents from freely travelling and working across Europe, we've prevented us from influencing EU decisions, and it's reduced our status on the international stage as a nation. We're less influential now because of this. Greens, my party, supports a return to Europe as soon as it's practically possible. So we'd want to return as soon as the domestic and political situation is favourable. But in the intermediate time running up to that, we would want to rejoin the customs union to make it easier to trade with our European partners. And we want to work towards freedom of movement for people to, again, to live and work across Europe. We'd also want to rejoin the Erasmus scheme. Thank you.
Another popular question which has been asked related to overseas is about the overseas aid budget. And perhaps you can keep your answers to 30 seconds here. The question is that's been posed for us is, the UK has slashed the overseas aid budget, turning its back on the fight against global poverty. And the question is, would your party restore the overseas aid budget to 0.7%? That's by the way of GDP. Let's go for Mary Foy.
Well, what a disgrace it was for the Conservatives to scrap that budget in the first place, and also to abolish the actual department for foreign trade investment overseas. Labour have a commitment, when the conditions are right, to restore the overseas development budget to that percentage, the percentage that was currently there. But because of the mess that we're in with the Conservatives, of the economic instability that we're facing, it won't be something we can do immediately.
Thank you. Luke Holmes, 0.7%.
We would like to get back to that level of foreign aid when it is affordable for the country. Let's not forget when we withdrew our foreign aid. It was 2020. It was the COVID-19 pandemic. We needed money so then we could save people's jobs and their livelihoods with the furlough scheme. And again, we needed that money so that we could protect low-income households with the energy price gap and the energy price guarantee when we were facing increasing energy prices. So we needed that money to protect British people from spiralling prices and from losing their jobs in COVID. But we will get back to that spending commitment, and we need to work towards it as it's affordable.
Thank you. Mark Belch.
I think our foreign aid budget is something like £13 billion at the moment, and additional seven to global quangos, whatever they do with our money, I don't know. We're in massive debt. We're in huge debt. It's something like £480,000 per household. It's phenomenal. Charity begins at home. We will cut the aid budget by 50%.
Thank you. And Jonathan Elmer.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, indeed, our party very much supports immediately restoring the overseas aid budget to 0.7%. That aid budget, as well as tackling poverty overseas, enables us to have influence as a country over the way different nations develop. If we pull back from having that influence, other people will fill the vacuum, and are doing. So, for example, many poor countries across the world now are going back to exploiting coal, oil and gas that they can extract and sell to Russia, for example. That's how money is now being made in measures that really do impact terribly across the planet. So, yes, we would restore it. Thank you, Chair.
The people going to food banks don't give a hoot about international reputation.
Excuse me. Mark Wilkes, thank you very much for your question. We're going to ask a question still on foreign policy around Ukraine.
Sorry?
Have I done everybody there? Is that okay? Forgive me, I'm so sorry, Mark Wilkes.
Oh, sorry, I thought you did ask me.
I did, and then I didn't let you say it. Mark, come on, please.
Well, let's be clear here. Don't let anyone delude you into the fact that there isn't enough money for us to help people in poverty around the world and to do our fair share. The Liberal Democrats would bring back 0.7% immediately. What we have to do is look at where we tax, not just in this country, but around the world. And the money is there, it can be found. And for anyone to suggest that we should not be doing our part, it quite frankly disgusts me.
Thank you. My apologies, Mark. Final foreign policy question. How should UK foreign and defence policy respond to the ongoing war in Ukraine? Mark Belch.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Of course. How should UK foreign and defence policy respond to the ongoing war in Ukraine?
We should increase our defence budget, absolutely, to defend our country.
Thank you. Mark Wilkes.
So, we've seen some significant cuts to defence over the years, and we need to get the numbers in our armed forces back up. And we need to make sure that we're working with other countries properly, not becoming isolationists like some people want to. We have a choice. We can allow a dictator to run across Europe. We know what happened last time that happened. Or we can stand up and work with our partners to make sure that we assist in any which way we can. And I'm proud of the fact that part of our migration figures are allowing Ukrainians to come here escaping from war, and that many of those are working in our county right now, contributing to our economy. We need to work with our partners, and we need to make sure that those people who seem to think that that being isolationist is somehow good don't get their way.
Thank you. Mary Foy.
Well, the Labour Party are committed to fully supporting Ukraine. Our support will be unwavering, and we will, when the conditions are right, increase the defence budget.
Thank you. Jonathan Elmer.
Thank you. I remember when the war first broke out, there were 3 lorries, actually truck drivers, stuck in my division where I'm a councillor. They'd come to make a delivery and then couldn't go back because the war had broken out. And I was simply astonished by how welcoming and immediately supportive the entire community was in looking after them, providing them food and toilet facilities and everything else. It was amazing. But that sort of solidarity needs to be replicated across the country and across the whole of Europe when we're faced with these sorts of threats. So yes, my party, the Green Party, would continue support for Ukraine in the way that we are doing now. We also support remaining in NATO, for example, but we would want to work towards a future approach where we do much more in terms of international negotiation and diplomacy to try and stop things like this breaking out in the first place. This is where we don't want to be as an end result. This is an example of failure in terms of international diplomacy that needs to be avoided in future. Thank you.
Thank you. And Luke Holmes.
Thank you. Well, first of all, Nigel Farage's comments about Ukraine, this particular issue, was absolutely shameful.
Taken out of context.
In no way.
Taken out of context.
In no way are the Ukrainian people or the West to blame for Vladimir Putin's invasion. But on the specifics about defence, what this it's incredibly important. The next Parliament is going to have to stand up to foreign aggression and protect the British people, which is why we're committed to boosting defence spending to our new NATO standard of 2.5% of GDP. In addition to that, what I would say is Angela Rayner, David Lammy, and half of Labour's front bench voted against our nuclear deterrent. The only party who are willing to protect the British people from foreign aggression are the Conservative Party.
Thank you very much indeed. Is that all of you? Thank you. Once bitten, twice shy. Let's ask a question. I'm going to be cheeky here. I'm going to ask you 3 questions at once, but you can answer which one you like. How generous is that? There's a number of questions around local sort of particular issues, and you can sort of pay your money, you take your choice. One question is the unfinished Milburn Gate Riverside development is a scar on the city. What can be done about it? You can answer that one. You can answer the question, has levelling up happened in Durham? Or also related to that, how would the candidates approach regenerating the high streets in Durham? So if you can do all 3 questions in 60 seconds, you're a better person than me, but I'm happy for you to talk about those particular local issues. Let's start off with Luke Holmes. Luke.
Well, what we've seen actually is levelling up working across County Durham, not the whole of County Durham though. Bishop Auckland got £72 million of investment to regenerate their high street, Spennymoor £20 million, but nothing for Durham City. And we need an MP who's willing to work with government, whatever party they are, to secure that funding, and that's exactly what I will do as your MP. And what I would do is I would make a new Durham Business Innovation Hub to help support businesses to grow, to thrive, to take on more customers, make more money, so they can employ more people, pay higher salaries, and grow our local economy to get local people into better quality, well-paid jobs.
Thank you. Jonathan Elmer.
I'm going to tackle the issue of our high streets. I think one of the real problems we have in this city, and actually replicated across many cities across the country, is that the shops themselves are not owned by the people who live in this area or the county. The shops are owned by big pension companies, big international companies. and they're an investment. And they simply want to get the biggest return in terms of the amount of rent people pay back. So the rent levels along our high streets are extremely high. And business rates are also connected to the levels of rent. So the reason we have so many empty shops is because it's just so expensive to set up. And that's again why we see a proliferation of big chains coming in, people that can actually afford to make that very long-term commitment. The tenancy agreements for these shops along the high street typically last about 5 years. There's a real need here for the county, and the city in particular, to take back control over the levers of economic development. We've just let all of that go to people who, frankly, have interests that are far, far away, and their interests aren't focused on the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Wilkes.
So levelling up was an absolute disgrace. Councils across the country spent an absolute fortune. They submitted bid after bid, and in the final bid, they submit it, and then after the bids have been submitted, the Conservative government changed the rules, making it absolutely fundamentally impossible for us to actually win any of the additional bids. And the Conservatives should be absolutely shameful. It was absolutely shameful what they did, and they should pay back every council, every penny that they invested in bringing forward these bids. On regeneration, I've got a record on that. You can go and have a look. We've been improving Framwellgate Moor High Street. And the question that nobody wants to ask, Milburn Gate, I'll answer it. Tollent went bust. Somebody built a load of buildings which are not fit and safe to be occupied. And until the council sees that there is a plan to fix that, they will stay there. There is work ongoing, and I'm hopeful that we'll see some action at some point. But ultimately, the council should not be taking on a development that is not safe, and actually would probably be illegal for us to do so based on the state it's in.
Mary Foy.
Well, yeah, I'll not say anything about the Milburn Gate situation, but Mark's answered that one. And levelling up, again, as Mark's pointed out, what an absolute letdown. There was one project in the whole of County Durham over the 3 rounds, and it was, believe it or not, the seat where the minister sits that got that project. So thousands have been spent and wasted by the council, not of their fault. High streets, I've had a campaign for healthy high streets, and I also chair the all-party parliamentary group on high streets. We need to revitalise them. We need more independent stores. What Labour are going to do is reform business rates and make sure that online retailers pay their fair share. And we also need to crack down on antisocial behaviour. I was in the marketplace this weekend, and one of the issues there is the antisocial behaviour in our marketplace and in our high streets. So we need a crackdown on that.
Thank you very much indeed. And Mark Belch.
If small businesses are finding it difficult to survive because of the cost of rent in our high street, I don't believe the answer is rent controls. Anyone that's ever read basic economics will know that rent controls don't work. But what I would do, and what Reform intend to do, is to make it a lot easier for small businesses to operate, to cover their costs, and actually make some money and survive. So we'll increase the corporation tax threshold by £100,000, which means 1.2 million small businesses won't now pay tax. We will abolish rent for small businesses, rates for small businesses, and reform the 21,000 pages of HMRC rules that businesses, and as a result of the regulation, much of which we inherited from the EU, adds costs to running a small business. So we need to get rid of the waste, get rid of the difficulty of doing business, and allow people to get on with it.
Thank you. Thank you all. A very popular question has been voted by 37 people is about refugees. And the question is, how will your party welcome and support refugees? Jonathan Elmer.
Thank you for that question. I think we have quite hopefully a radical position on refugees, but I wouldn't say it's radical, because I'm going to look back now to just after the Second World War, when the Refugee Convention first appeared. It was 1951, and then the protocol in 1967. This is the Refugee Convention that the far right in Europe and this country are currently trying to move away from. The convention was negotiated by none other than Winston Churchill. It was done because after the Second World War, there was such a problem with war and people migrating and a need for people to basically establish the right for people to claim, for refugees to claim asylum in any country that they went to. Now, I absolutely support that right. It's something that needs to continue, especially for a civilized country like ours. Our country, though you might not realize it, is actually per capita a country in Europe that takes the fewest refugees. It's hard to believe from the rhetoric you hear. But to me, this is about basic decency and looking after people that are fleeing from war or violence.
Thank you, Mary Foy.
Well, Britain has a very proud history of welcoming refugees, and I'm very pleased about that. I worked very hard to support the Syrian refugees when they came to the country a few years ago. And we also, in Durham, as been pointed out, welcomed the refugees from Ukraine. I believe that refugees should always be welcome in our country. They're fleeing war, they're fleeing famine, and as we all should remember, what's happening with climate change, those countries in the south are the ones who are affected most by climate change, by flood, by famine, by fire, and we're always going to see refugees coming to safer lands. And let's just hope that if we were struggling in that condition, that we would be welcomed in somebody else's country. So refugees will always be welcome in our country.
Mark Belch.
I absolutely agree. I echo that. But I think it's very important to distinguish between genuine refugees and economic migrants who are not refugees. My wife was a refugee, and I'm very proud that we have a tradition of welcoming people in need, genuine need. And I would hope that we continue, and I know Reform are committed to continuing to bringing refugees into the country where it's justified, where it's genuine, I should say. But the important thing is that they contribute to our economy and they contribute to our society in a positive way. That's all I ask.
Thank you. Luke Holmes.
Well, I think we will always support genuine refugees, but we can't allow ourselves to be taken advantage of by organised smuggling gangs like those operating in the Channel. And with control of our borders, we can do more to help refugees fleeing persecution. In addition to maintaining visa schemes for people fleeing Hong Kong, Ukraine, and our Afghan settlement schemes, we will give Parliament control of how many places we offer on safe and legal routes to support those in genuine need from around the world, with a cap based on the capacity of local areas.
Thank you very much indeed. Mark Wilkes.
So for starters, I'd scrap the policy of locking up children when they arrive in this country. I'd get rid of Hassock Field, locking up women hundreds of miles away from where they might have family members. I'd scrap this ridiculous Rwanda scheme, which has seen one person go, but he actually got given money to go. And I'd make sure that we were working with our partners across Europe so that those who are seeking asylum are able to seek asylum in a safe country, and then we take our genuine fair share of those people who are desperate and fleeing from war and famine and all of the other problems. What I wouldn't do is seem to castigate those people who come to this country as somehow not wanted, because I am proud of the fact that we've brought Ukrainian refugees here. I'm proud of the fact that we honoured our commitment to those people from Hong Kong fleeing persecution. And I think that rhetoric that some colleagues have said here of negativity and persecution, we need to rid that from our politics.
Thank you. The question that's been popular with many of you here tonight is a question from Matthew. It starts with a statement I can't verify, so don't quote me on this, but the question is one for us all. 50% of new teachers quit after 5 years, 40% work 50 plus hours a week, and 90% are worried about basic finances. The question for you all is, what will you do to help our education system? Mark Wilkes, let's come back to you.
Well, for starters, I wouldn't be putting a tax on private schools, because if a parent wants their child to go to a private school, that's fine. But if you're not going to put the money in for when those children then have to go to a state school and put even more pressure onto our state school system, which is already struggling, and there's lots of people contact me saying that they can't get a school place in this city, if you're not going to fix that, then why would you put even more pressure on it? More importantly, we need to value our teachers more. And we need to make sure, and what the Liberal Democrats will do, is separate from government so that we have an independent calculation each year of what those pay scales should be. But we'll also make sure that we put the additional funding in for those most disadvantaged pupils to make sure that they get the additional tutoring. Ultimately, we need to make sure that our teachers are seen to be valued.
Thank you very much. Mark Belch.
I would agree with Mark. It's something that I wouldn't do. I certainly would not put VAT on private school fees. That's just going to see more pressure on the state school system. I want to see a much better state school system. I went to a dreadful school. I wouldn't wish it upon anybody. The state school system needs to be better. But many parents struggle to put their children through private education, and only because they value education. And we should value education. I'd rather value education than spending the same amount of money on a holiday to Ibiza and drugs and hookers, or whatever people choose to spend their money on. Why would anyone make it difficult for somebody to educate their children? It makes no sense to me. But in doing so, creating a bigger problem for state schools. Unbelievable.
Jonathan Elmer.
There's so much to say on this, and only a minute. But I think the problem is that education has turned into an underfunded production line rather than valuing children's unique individual qualities. We want children to be able to reach their potential. I'm going to quickly list. My party would restore student grants. We want to invest £1.4 billion a year back into Sure Start centres. We want to extend the current offer for childcare to 35 hours a week. 8.8 billion additional spending into the school system, and 2 billion reserved to uplift teachers' pays. We want to move academies and free schools back into local authority control so that there's fairness and parity across the system. That actually creates a more efficient system as well. We want to protect the provision of free school breakfast clubs. We want to ensure that there's money invested into SEND provision. So a whole range of activities that need to be conducted with a degree of urgency to lift our education system back off its knees. Thank you.
Thank you. Luke Holmes.
Well, I agree with Mark about VAT on private school tuition fees. I think this is a horrendous idea. What it's going to result in is children being taken out of private school, placed into state schools. We're going to have huge class sizes, which will be detrimental to our kids' education. And with regards to teachers, new teachers in priority areas and key STEM and technical subjects will receive bonuses of up to £30,000 tax-free, because we are committed to making sure we get teachers in core areas of the curriculum. But we also need targeted support for underperforming schools to make sure that state schools are as good of a quality, if not better, than private schools, because every child deserves the best possible start in life and the best possible education. We need to enhance the curriculum, we need better parent and community engagement, and we need a better solution for SEN support to make sure that children with needs get the best possible education.
Thank you. Finally, Mary Foy.
Our teachers are nurturing our young people every day from a very early age, and things have been made very difficult for them recently because some of them are having to feed children. Children are coming into school hungry. They're acting like social workers in some cases. So we need to value teachers by uplifting their wages and improving the working conditions. We're seeing teachers leaving the profession on a daily basis, and some of them, because of the wages, can't afford. They're using food banks, I've heard as well, and I've worked with the teachers' unions, and I'm very proud to work alongside them, and they do keep me updated with some of the horrors that's happening in education at the minute. Labour will provide 6,500 new teachers, specifically for subjects like maths, and we will create 3,000 nursery places attached to primary schools. And of course, as others have said, SEN needs to be looked at, it needs to be reformed, and it needs to be inclusive. And there are a lot of children who have SEN needs who are in mainstream school. We need to work with the teachers to support them in mainstream school, but make sure those with more complex needs have a place in a special education provision.
Thank you. A question relating now to assisted dying. What would your stance be on legislation for assisted dying? Mary Foy.
I've had a number of people contact me about assisted dying, and it's a very difficult one. I think in the past I have been totally against assisted dying, but listening to people who have been in that position, whose family members are in that position where their loved ones are struggling so much, I've been, I guess, what I think now is we do need to look at it as a whole. We need it to be cross-party and look at the issue and try and understand what these families are going through. But I would, I don't know how I would vote if I was given the choice to vote, but I do think that we need to put some precautions in place around people having that capacity to decide whether they want to die or not. It needs to be up to that person that that their mind is in the right place if they choose to do so.
Thank you. Luke Holmes.
Well, to be honest, I would vote against measures to make it legal because I think lives are too valuable to be thrown away like that. What we need is better palliative care. We need to look after people in their final days much better. So personally, my view is no, it shouldn't be legal. Assisted dying should remain illegal as it currently is.
Thank you. Mark Wilkes.
I can remember the last conversation I had with my dad. He was on a COVID ward. Could hardly breathe. He was in absolute agony. I can remember the last conversation I had in February with my mother, who had been screaming out for months to say, just let me go. If I'm your MP, I will vote to have the legislation debated. But what I would want to see is to make sure that that legislation gave the protections to our most vulnerable in this society. We have to make a decision as individuals as to you make your own decision as an individual on your life. I think that the legislation should be there, but the concern I have is ensuring that it cannot be abused, and that would be where I would be wanting to listen and understand how that legislation was put in place.
Thank you. Mark Belch.
It's a very difficult one, isn't it? I'm sure that my view would be very different if I experienced the same situation. If somebody that I loved was crying out in pain for help, I would probably take a different view. But my view at the moment is that I believe in the sanctity of life. I believe it's morally wrong to assist suicide. I think it's a slippery slope, and it opens up all sorts of questions about vulnerable people. It's a complicated thing, isn't it? I don't think it's beyond the ability of clever people to work out a solution, but I err on the side that I believe it's morally wrong.
Thank you. And finally, Jonathan Elmer.
Yes, it's such a difficult question to have been asked. I think I mean, it comes down to me for the need for people to actually be able to make a choice when they're suffering a terminal illness, to choose themselves how they wish to end their lives. So it comes to me fundamentally about choice. But I absolutely agree with what other people on the panel have been saying, that legislation that enables people to make that choice is vulnerable to being abused. So we've got to try and find a way of putting the checks and balances into such legislation. I also agree with the need for some sort of cross-parliamentary debate to devise a strong legislation that enables this to go forward unabused. There are other countries in Europe that have already put this in place, so there'll be lessons to learn from other people. But that doesn't avoid the need to have a better funded and better supported palliative care process. That has to be there as well. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to end up with two slightly snap-fire questions. You can keep the answers as quick as you can, please. This is a very popular question. In fact, it's the Eurovision winner tonight. Is what is a policy that you disagree with in your party's manifesto? And kind of rephrasing it, what would you do about it if you needed to speak up for the better of Durham citizens? So a policy that you disagree with, presumably you've all read your manifestos. So let's start with Mark Belch. Is there a policy you disagree with and what would you do about it?
Oh, gosh. I haven't actually come across one that I disagree with.
OK.
Did you write it?
That's fine.
No, I can't. I honestly, I've got the policy here. I've read it.
Thank you. Jonathan Elmer.
Really tough for me as well, because I've gravitated the Green Party because I really support pretty much everything they support. I guess one thing to mention that people often are critical of me over as a Green Party supporter is our party's support for taking away nuclear power. So, and I used to support as well the need to retain nuclear power because of its possibilities for, improving our journey to net neutrality. But now I've looked into the detail, and I have to say that it's so much cheaper to bring wind and solar online, and that gives you cheaper access to energy as well, so much faster to bring it online, that there's just no argument left there. So that's the one thing I would have
done if we'd asked you before. Yeah, OK, well, that's nice to know. Mark Wilkes.
Well, certainly not happy with the length of it, because it takes an awful
War and
long
Peace,
time to read. I think there's probably a couple of things. I mean, I suppose for me, having seen with my mum and the care workers coming into the house, that commitment of paying care workers at least £2 more than the living wage, I would have wanted that to be higher.
Thank you. Luke Holmes.
For me, it's the introduction of mandatory national service. I think it offers great skills, great opportunities for young people, but it shouldn't be mandatory. When I was 16, I went straight into the workplace. I had a job at 16. The last thing I wanted is to stop earning money to go and volunteer for the army.
Thank you very much indeed. And Mary Foy.
Well, for me, the big one for me is the two-child limit that the Tories brought in. I know that if we scrap the two-child limit, it would lift people out of poverty immediately. I've advocated for it. I've wrote to the Shadow Minister, and they have assured me that they will look at it again and have other measures in place to reduce poverty in families. But that's one that I think that we should really have had in the manifesto.
Thank you, and thank you very much for your honesty, all five of you. Last question, which I think is there. It didn't get the top vote, but I wanted to ask it anyway. It is Friday, the 5th of July, and you haven't been elected to Parliament. Imagine that. What would you be doing? Mark Wilkes.
I'd be back at County Hall, fighting to tackle climate change and to bring better housing for people, and probably answering an enormous number of emails that I've missed to make sure that I can actually help those people who elected me.
Thank you, Luke Holmes.
Maybe having a few pints.
OK, Luke Holmes.
Well, to be honest, the count goes on quite late. It's early hours of Friday morning, so I'm going to have a lie in.
OK.
And then probably go to County Hall, same as Mark, to catch up on emails, because there's a few hundred sitting there, and I can do about 50 on a night, but not much more.
Okay, thank you. Mary Foy.
Well, I think first of all I will be sleeping, having a long lie in, and then secondly I think I'll be consoling my staff and thinking about clearing the office in Westminster. And I think thirdly I would be absolutely devastated that we couldn't put our policies into place to transform this country and to rebuild this country in the service of the people.
Thank you. Jonathan Elmer.
Well, this isn't really an issue for me because we're going to win.
Thank you. And Mark Belch.
Well, I've never done this before. I'm just a normal bloke who wants to see right happen in our country. So I've made a lot of mistakes along the way. I could have done it a lot better. So I think I'll be reflecting on my entire campaign and experience of being involved in this sort of process, so that I can work hard for the next election.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we have been really blessed tonight with fantastic responses, and I want on your behalf to say thank you to all the candidates, not only putting yourself up for election, which is a vital part of our democratic process, but also for deputing yourselves to our questions tonight. These are questions that you've all asked, that you've all voted for. You've responded, you didn't know them in advance, perhaps if you were very nifty on your phones, you saw them coming up the polling rankings, but you've responded brilliantly to us all tonight. Can we express our appreciation for these candidates? You don't know what an ordeal it is. You've done really well. Can I say thank you to you for coming? It is enormously encouraging to see the nave of this cathedral full of people engaging with these vital kind of questions affecting the future of our country. Just the presence of so many people when we hear that Hustings in some parts of the country have not been well populated is a real encouragement. Thank you for the questions that you've put in, which were really, really good. I'm sorry I didn't get to all of them, but we'd be staying long past midnight if we did. The next Durham Cathedral Institute event is going to be on the 17th of October at 7:30. It's on the theme of criminal justice, and the speakers will include Wendy Joseph KC, a retired Old Bailey judge, and our panel will consider whether we get the justice we deserve. There'll be more information about this event. In fact, it's already there on our website, including details on how to book a free ticket. Just search up Durham Cathedral Institute. Now, Christians are encouraged in the Bible to seek the common good and to pray for those in authority. And therefore, I'm going to invite the Reverend Alan Middleton, Chair of Durham Churches Together, to close this time in prayer. Obviously, if we're not required to join in, but you're welcome to do so. Alan, over to you.
Let us pray. Lord, we give thanks for the privileges and responsibilities of living in a democratic society. Give us wisdom to play our part at election time, that through the exercise of each vote, your kingdom may come closer. Protect us from despair and cynicism. Guard us against the idols of false utopias, and strengthen us to make politics a noble calling that serves the common good of all. Give grace to the candidates standing in this constituency, that they will be strengthened as they seek to serve others. We ask this in the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Alan. And thank you very much indeed, all of you, for coming. Thank you for your patience, including when I made mistakes and didn't include all of you. Have a very safe journey home and look forward to seeing you soon. God bless.